My name is Hillel Neuer, and I'm the executive director of UN Watch. We're an organization based in Geneva, Switzerland, who has the mandate to monitor the United Nations and hold it to account by the principles of its own charter. We fight anti-Semitism and anti-Israel prejudice. We're also a leading promoter of human rights at the United Nations. We organize the annual Geneva Summit for Human Rights, giving a platform to dissidents from China, Russia, Zimbabwe, Cuba, and many other non-democracies that are often elected to United Nations bodies. And we actually believe you need to elevate the victims, the dissidents, the courageous champions of human rights, and not the perpetrators. So that's UN Watch in a nutshell.
Amazing. So if we're starting to look at the UN, it started after World War II, right? So what do we see in the UN Charter? What is this ruler that you look at them through?
Well, the UN Charter was adopted in 1945, and it's actually a great document of liberal internationalism, which conveys the best principles of what Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his group had in mind for the post-war order. This was the anti-Hitler alliance. So the principles are there: freedom, security, peace, equality of treatment for all nations. Sadly, at the United Nations, these are rarely, if ever, implemented. So we thought it was necessary. Our founder was Morris Abram, was a civil rights defender in America, one of the civil rights leaders who worked very closely with Martin Luther King. He had served as a U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and he saw how things had gotten off track. And he had the idea in 1993 to create the first outside organization that would have the mission to hold the UN accountable to its own principles.
Amazing. I want to show one short video of you doing your job.
I stand before you today with a deep sense of injustice and determination. Injustice because I have served this council with rigor and in good faith, and for doing so, I have faced relentless personal threats, insults, and reprisals. Today I present the findings of my 8th report, the 5th documenting the ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people.
We're grateful to the Special Rapporteur. The report clearly shows what Cuba and other countries have said.
We strongly condemn the ongoing attack, intimidation, and defamation aimed at discrediting and silencing the Special Rapporteur.
We also condemn the systematic campaigns of lies and disinformation circulated by non-governmental institutions.
Okay, now we will turn to the list of speakers for non-governmental organizations. I give the floor to the representative of United Nations Watch.
Ms. Albanese, in your report on torture, why is there not one single mention of Hamas's horrific torture of Israeli hostages? You've said it's not in my mandate, but on March 4th, you signed a UN statement condemning U.S. and Israeli strikes in Iran. Are you mandated to speak on events 1,000 miles away from your focus area and not to say one word on the atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th and for 2 years after in their Gaza tunnels? And when you choose to speak on Iran, why is it only to defend the regime after you refuse to say a single word for the thousands of protesters they massacred? 1 year ago, the Council President announced that he spoke to you about your conduct and that you acknowledged his considerations. However, on September 15th, you said, quote, 380,000 children under 5 were killed in Gaza. Are you aware this is more than the entire population of children under 5 in Gaza? On October 22nd, you reposted this statement, quote, Israel is the incarnation of evil. Yes or no? Is this still your position? On January 6th, you reposted this. Israel is pure evil in a way the world has never seen before. Yes or no? Is this still your position? Canada and Germany condemned you for anti-Semitism and Holocaust inversion. The French Prime Minister has called for your resignation. The UK has called for an investigation. Italy, Netherlands, Argentina, and many others have condemned your conduct. Ms. Albanese, when so many democracies speak with one voice, the problem is not them, it's you.
how long do you have to prepare to speak like this, to be able to speak like this? Is this you? Like, are you at home? Like, when you go shopping, is how, like, you speak, I don't know, think so clearly, express yourself so, I mean, that was amazing. How do you prepare to a situation like that? I'm
Thank
asking
you.
because a lot of us have to speak publicly in City Hall, and not everyone are used to that.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Um, I don't have any special formula um, or really secrets to share. I um, try to focus on the facts and to make an argument. I only have 90 seconds, so I guess it's really essential to focus on what point you want to make and to keep editing and editing so that the more time that you have to edit, you can keep refining it so you get to the essence. And sometimes I have to, delete things that I wanted to say. So again, I only have 90 seconds. So it means if I speak as quickly as I can, the maximum I could ever deliver is 270 words. So yeah, try to stay focused, make a logical argument. Obviously, it's not just logic. You're also trying to appeal to emotions and so forth. But at the end, I do feel that it's important for me to make a powerful argument. The world will see that we made a powerful argument and know that these arguments exist, know that the truth exists, that we have the facts on our side. We don't have control if the UN wants to appoint a horrible anti-Semite. Unfortunately, we can do our best, but that's it. But at least we want the world to know the truth and to know that the truth was said, that someone did take the floor. History will record that the truth was said.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference, at least for us from the side, to see that someone is speaking up. But what do you think? How can we explain what happened to the UN? How did it go from let's make World War II never happen again to we are just, it looks like the reporting that Ali Tabrizi released about the UN, it seems like it's just like a gang of criminals. How
Yeah,
did it go
well,
from here to there?
there once was a time when I would speak about the UN and it was so different from everything else that's going on in the world. Sadly, the upside down world that we have at the UN, you can find often just by turning on your television station, not just Al Jazeera, but could it even be the BBC and many other channels where things are upside down. So, and certainly in the universities and other parts of our culture. And again, there was a time when I began about 20 years ago, there was a huge gap between what was said in normal society and what was said at the UN. And now, sadly, that gap has shrunk. And so many of the horrible things that are said and done at the UN are done elsewhere in regular society. And when I mean regular, I mean in a democratic country, because the UN is distinct for me because I never lived in the Soviet Union. I never lived in Iran. I never lived in Cuba. I never lived in China. People who've lived under totalitarian regimes or non-democracies, they know what state propaganda is. They they know what living under such a society is like. And I've never had that experience. But when I walk into the UN, you're entering a place where China and Russia and Cuba and Iran and Syria and all the others have enormous influence and often dominate. Not always. Sometimes the democracies fight back, but more and more they dominate and they influence the bureaucracy. And so I'll share with you a story. A few years ago, Iran was up for some kind of review, meaning every 5 years in Geneva, a country is supposed to get reviewed for their human rights record. Sounds like a nice idea, but those doing the reviews are the other countries. So when Iran gets reviewed, China says, Iran, you did such a great job the past 5 years. And when China gets reviewed, Iran says the same thing about China. So it's mostly mutual praise society, but at least once every 5 years, for 3 hours, Iran gets reviewed. Okay. So, of course, they're very clever. And when they saw they were being reviewed, or it might have been some other kind of event happening where they were on the spotlight, they arranged an event, a fashion show. It wasn't a fashion show, it was an exhibit. It was an exhibit of Iranian women's clothing, okay? Beautiful garments that I'm told by Iranians could not be worn today, right? So these weren't miniskirts, but even there were maybe long dresses for women, but very beautifully embroidered, very colorful. and they would not qualify under the morality rules that apply. You see women have to wear these, black um, uh, coats and cover their hair strictly and all these kinds of things. So the whole thing was a propaganda exercise. And Iranian, an exhibit of Iranian women's clothing and so forth. And so I lifted up my phone and I said, "Hey, everyone, check out this propaganda exhibit here." And I did a short clip, 60 seconds. I put it on the internet, on social media. And a day or two later, I got a letter from the UN saying, "We're threatening to take your badge away, to kick you out of the UN because you took a recording that's illegal." All
Oh,
right. And so that for me was kind of feeling like I'm in a totalitarian world. And every time I walk in the UN, it's like I'm not in, because I'm based in Switzerland, and I walk in Geneva from the street into the UN, and suddenly someone can say, "You do a video of something that's public. This is a public exhibit calling out a dictatorship, and for that we could take your badge away because you didn't respect some rules about recordings." And it wasn't like they said, "Oh, let's hear your side," and maybe we don't know the facts. It was right away a threat. So the same UN, if I make a complaint, you just showed a video of me confronting this horrible raving anti-Semite, Francesca Albanese, when I exposed the fact that she took funding from a pro-Hamas group in Australia for her visit in Australia, and they said they funded her. Okay, this group called Australian Friends of Palestine. They praised Yahya Sinwar, and they said we sponsored her trip in Australia. We wrote about this, the UN said we need to investigate, and it took them a year and a half to finally a panel accepted that yes, she did take some funding from an external group. But whenever we make a complaint, if you're lucky, it takes a year and a half, right? On something that you could find out the answer in a minute, right? When we complain about UNRWA teachers who belong to Hamas or who praise terrorism, and they're a teacher in school, and they say, "Oh, we need to investigate." What do you mean you need to investigate? We just put out the Facebook post of this teacher. It has a picture of the person. It's their Facebook post saying they love Hamas, saying they praise an attack. We need to launch an investigation. It's nonsense. It would take, they say they need a year, but when it's something to stop me from speaking within a day, I get the order, "You're guilty and the punishment will come immediately unless, A, B, or C." So just to share with you the disconnect that we experience.
yeah, it's amazing. And I want to show this on your site. I thought that the graphic was kind of genius. Um, the 7 problems with human rights, but just looking at the database first. Do you guys see that? How many complaints, condemnatory resolutions were done in the UN in 1 year?
In the
Just
past 10 years, in the past 10 years.
past 10 years. 187 against us. And this is the rest of the world. Libya never
And
did
and the
anything.
whole rest of the world is zero. So zero on China, zero on Cuba, zero on Pakistan, zero on Turkey. You had 5 or 6 countries that get criticized a little bit once a year, and the rest of the world is zero.
So the entire UN is just a machine against us? This is what it is?
Well, it is often used as such. I would say, the default of the UN is to be diplomatic and to do nothing, right? It's in many interests. If you are an ambassador, you want to make friends. That's what ambassadors want to do. You don't want to make waves. You want to make friends. So you don't want to criticize China, and you don't want to criticize Cuba, and you don't want to criticize any country. So the default is to do nothing and say nothing. That's the default. And then there are exceptions, right? If there's horrible killings in Sudan, and if you represent the UK or America or Canada, you will have decent people in your country saying, "We got to do something about Sudan." So you might say something about Sudan. You might say something about Syria. You might about Iran. You might about North Korea. Countries, let's say North Korea is relatively weak in the world. So, there'll be a few exceptions where you do speak out. And I say you, I mean the democracies. 30 or 40 countries, that can sometimes get a majority. So on the chart that you're showing on our website, you can see that there is the same one that you showed before. You can see that once a year there's a resolution on Iran. There's a few more on Russia, once on North Korea, once on Syria. That's every year. For 10 years, you get 11 or 12. And so the default basically is to be silent on most. with a few exceptions. And then Israel is the exception. So there you have 56 Muslim countries want to condemn Israel. That's their agenda. And sadly, the European countries go along. I would say 2/3, 10 out of 15 resolutions against Israel, the EU countries go along.
Yeah, and we grew up on this amazing speech of Abba Evan when he was in the UN about Zionism is racism, and now we have it passed as a law in Spain. I live in France, so just next to us, Spain, in Catalonia, Zionism is racism. So the entire UN feels, and on another Monday meeting, we had a follow the money expert showing how the UN finance everything, UNRWA, but through that, everything that goes against us in the Gaza through UNRWA, etc. So there's no. It feels like if we would just won't have the UN, most of our problems will be gone. Like they are the origin of a lot of the hate that we're getting, isn't it?
They play a key role. I mean, the UN has you could say two modes, two ways of functioning. In one case, it's a forum, and where every country speaks, and you're hearing what countries think. You hear at the UN what Iran thinks and what Syria thinks and what Cuba thinks. So in that sense, the UN is, you could say, a neutral forum. That's just an empty vessel, and it can play that role. But of course, the UN is much more than that. The UN has a Secretary General. It has the agencies. You listed several of them, UNRWA, and they adopt resolutions and they make statements and they appoint experts and they have reports. And the obsession with Israel is quite significant. A very large amount of time at the UN is spent on Israel. I mean, the World Health Organization meets once a year in Geneva, and they spend a couple of days talking about global health crises, but there's a few hours just about Israel and no other country. There's not a few hours about Russia bombing people in Ukraine or Syria bombing hospitals. You would almost never have that. And that's, again, 56 Arab states pushing for this, 56 Muslim states to be precise, 56 Muslim states to be precise, about 22 Arab states, and included within the 56. And they push for these things, but they get this automatic majority. You mentioned Abba Eban. He very famously made the comment that if Algeria were to introduce a resolution declaring that the earth is flat and that Israel was responsible for making it flat, the resolution would pass by 168 to 12 with 13 abstentions. And, that comment made decades ago still applies. So sadly, the UN is certainly abused, as are other international institutions, right? I mean, the international courts have been abused for these things. So you take an institution, and if there are enough bad actors willing to push to hijack that institution, and there's not enough good actors willing to fight back, then they become hijacked. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. And someone is not muted.
You should have a button to mute everybody or something.
Yeah, I think I did. Sorry about that. So I want to ask you a personal question. Many of us experience much less intense public situation with much less dictatorships around us, and it's very scary. Sometimes you go on stage and you say something and you know that the other people doesn't share the same democratic values as you do, and you do it all the time. How do you deal with this sense that this could go the wrong way one day, maybe? Do you have a sense of maybe what I'm doing is dangerous? Do you deal with these doubts?
Yes, in today's day and age, being a Jew is dangerous. Walking in London as an identifiable Jew is dangerous, and the same can be true in many other places. So if you're in addition, reaching out to large audiences and standing up for Israel, then of course there's a danger attached to it, and we're mindful of it, and we take whatever security measures we can. It's a scary time to be sure, but we have no choice. If we don't speak up, then the evil people will take over the world, as in some cases they're trying to do. So it's not a pleasant situation we all find ourselves in, but we have no choice. We know what the alternatives are. The alternative is to surrender to radical Islamists and other extremists who want to destroy Western civilization, want to destroy Israel, and we have to stand up. We have no choice.
Two questions. Do you think that the UN is no longer fit for purpose? And what do you think of Trump's alternative UN?
Okay, well, that's a good question. The UN may well be not fit for purpose, but it's not going away. There is no alternative really to the UN. I'll come in a moment to Trump's Board of Peace and so forth. But so far, no one is leaving the UN. Even if you look at Trump's, we'll talk about his alternative, the Board of Peace, which was supposed to deal with Gaza, but then expanded potentially to deal with other things. And, he didn't exclude Qatar. He didn't exclude Turkey. So there's a lot of dictators there. The good part is at least that Trump is in charge. So as long as there's the Board of Peace and it exists, I don't know if it'll exist beyond his presidency. It's hard to imagine that it will, unless perhaps someone from his administration continues in power. But so far, it's not replacing the UN. Although I will say that the UN does see it as some competition. I would say, on the issue of Gaza, certainly it is serious competition because they did hire serious people. I mean, Tony Blair's involved, and there's a gentleman named Nikolai Mladenov who actually was the UN from Bulgaria, was the UN special coordinator of the peace process here in the Middle East, and he's now, I think, their top person, their top bureaucrat or so forth. So it does pose some competition to the UN, but not fundamentally to the entity as a whole. And of course, the entity as a whole, the leading countries like the EU and Japan and Canada and Australia are still very much engaged with the UN. So it's not going away. So in many cases, it's not fit for purpose, to answer your question, but it's there and it has influence. So our goal should be to get our governments to speak up and try and say and do the right thing. It may not always win, but if at least they speak up and go on the record to oppose injustice, that's important. If a resolution passes and it says some horrible thing, which many of them do, it could be about Israel or it could be praising Sri Lanka after they killed 40,000 Tamils or all kinds of different things. If our host talked about the Zionism is racism decision that happened in 1975. In 1975, the General Assembly, pushed by Arab states, but the Soviet Union was clearly involved, adopted the infamous declaration that Zionism is a form of racism. In that horrible debate, which was November 1975, there were two memorable speeches. One was by Israel's ambassador at the time, was Chaim Herzog, and he gave a magnificent speech where he really recalled the history of the Jewish people, the history of Israel. It's really a magnificent speech. And in the end, he said, the Jewish people regard this resolution as nothing but a piece of paper, and he tore it into two. So that's a famous moment where he tore up the resolution, but you should really read the speech. You can find it if you just search on the internet, Chaim Herzog, his speech, and I'm sure it's on our website, UN Watch, his speech from 1975. It's a great speech about Israel and the Jewish people. And another speech that was given by an American named U.S. Ambassador Patrick Moynihan, also a magnificent speech, one of the best speeches ever delivered at the UN. So they were both in the minority. The resolution passed, but for the sake of history and for the sake of people like me and all of you, were able to be inspired by the speeches they gave. So that's why I say, even if the UN isn't fit for purpose, given that our democracies are not leaving, it's not going away, at least go on record, speak the truth, it matters.